On today's World Insight with Tian Wei, the World Bank, the institution for global development, has to find a new leader. Where will that person come from? The latest gigs and tech in their biggest show. As the Consumer Electronics Show kicks off, what will sweep us off our feet now? And welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you live on CGTN. We begin with the major developments in the World Bank. Its President Dr. Yong Kim said he is resigning at the end of this month without finishing his term. He's reportedly at odds with the Trump administration's policies on climate change. What's the blowback of his resignation? Will this trigger a reform in the World Bank system? Before our discussion, look at this.
An abrupt resignation. Yong Kim's resignation from the World Bank came as a shock to many, as he still had more than 3 years left in his current term. Kim was nominated by former U.S. President Barack Obama for a first and second term. He had pushed financing for green energy projects and largely dropped support for coal power investments, but had avoided public clashes with the Trump administration. Analysts say this is likely to set off a fierce battle between the U.S. and other countries, as it'll give Donald Trump the opportunity to nominate his choice to fill the World Bank post. Since the creation of the World Bank at the end of World War II, its leaders have all been Americans. Other emerging countries, including China and other Asian nations, have criticized the selection process. The next day, the World Bank released a report cutting global growth forecast for 2019 by 1/10 of a percentage point to just below 3%. According to the World Bank, from 2010 to 2016, 7 major emerging markets accounted for almost 1/4 of global economic output. In 2016 alone, these emerging markets contributed 1 percentage point to a total 2.4% global growth rate. After Kim's resignation, CEO Kristalina Georgieva will assume the role of interim president. The 189-nation World Bank is the largest government source for development funding, providing low-cost loans for projects around the world. Amid global economic slowdown, the leadership transition is sure to bring further uncertainties.
For more discussion on the World Bank President Yong Kim's resignation and who's next, we are joined in New York by Max Wolf, managing partner and at Multivariate and also professor at the New School University. In Beijing studio, entertainment, political and economic affairs commentator. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Well, may I go to you first, Professor Wolf? This is a sudden resignation. Of course, today it is already being known that Mr. Kim will join a private equity firm on infrastructure called the GIP, but that is not the point. The point is, why is he leaving so abruptly? Well, he obviously has been contributing and very enthusiastic of his job as the president of the World Bank.
Yes, so great to be here. Thanks for having me. Dr. Kim is almost universally well-liked, and I think he's sort of famous for being very diplomatic. So to see a sudden departure without much notice is very much not who this individual Dr. Kim is. So clearly there's something going on there or about to happen which has made him upset. And given the relatively abrupt announcement of departure from Nikki Haley, who was the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, it does appear that there is something being discussed at the highest levels of the U.S. government that is distasteful enough to get very diplomatic career folks disinterested in continuing to be associated with the administration, which is probably another topic for another day, but it is not a comforting thought at all. I think Dr. Kim deserves a lot of credit for having a life in global service. He was a true internationalist on most of American history, and probably the balance of global leadership position. That's a good thing. It's come to be seen as a sort of a negative, almost an insult, to be called a globalist in the Trump administration. Wow. And he had made, as have so many, climate change his sort of feature position, and the Trump administration has departed radically with recent American and global opinion on that subject. So clearly that may be the issue here. But what we're going to have now is a struggle over whether the United States, which, by the way, probably for the first time in the history of the World Bank won't be the biggest economy, can still name a person to lead this institution, especially if the person and the U.S. government doesn't support the institution of the World Bank as much as it has historically over the 70 years.
We'll, of course, discuss that issue a bit later in our discussion. Mr. Tangen, though, we all know Dr. Kim, even though as president of the World Bank, has been a nominee by President Obama. And that was during the earlier administration. Of course, the current administration, compared to the earlier, has been not necessarily seeing eye to eye on many issues, Mr. Tangen.
You're absolutely right. I mean, Donald Trump has not hidden his disdain for the World Bank. He sees it as a bunch of do-gooders who have not done good for the United States. It does not fit with his America First policy and goals. So, yes, he's been very, very dismissive, and it's quite possible, as Max said, that something is in the offing that could radically change. I mean, he has threatened to pull out of institutions before. Basically, every multilateral organization out there has been under attack by him. So it wouldn't be surprising, I think, to many people if he had an idea, especially one that could be very sensational.
Last year, I did have the opportunity to interview Dr. Yong Kim. In fact, in the latter half of the year, and asked him his opinion on leadership. Here's what he said when he was still the president of the World Bank. He emphasized, in fact, on hope. Listen.
For me, hope is not what you come to on the basis of analysis. Hope is a moral choice. And in a position like mine, if I ever tell you that a country or a group of people is hopeless, you should make sure that I get fired. Because there's no such thing as a country without hope. There's no such thing as a group of people without hope, if people like you and me will do the right thing. The one thing I'd say about leadership is that right now, what I see is a narrowing of the scope of concern for leaders. In other words, leaders are much more now turning to saying, well, I'm going to think about my problem. I'm not going to think about the problem. Right? The problem is climate change in the world. The problem is 8 billion people who by 2025 we're going to have access to broadband, have access to smartphones, but if you then turn around and instead say, well, I'm going to only think about the people who vote for me, or I'm only going to think about my country, or even my region, my state, if you think about that, if you think about my problem, then we're going to be in trouble.
Dr. Yong Kim, the president of the World Bank until the 1st of February, earlier talking to me. Obviously, he's been talking about the difference, Professor Wolf, between the problem and my problem. The problem is the bigger issue, while my problem is a very limited issue with a limited vision. But the question is, what will be the role of the World Bank for the future, given the fact there is already huge debate about what should be the global development like and what the problem is likely to be defined? Professor Wolf.
Yeah, so clearly we know that the World Bank has been a bit slow to evolve with the global economy it serves. So largely its institution and its power players represent the world of the Bretton Woods agreements at the end of the Second World War, and that was obviously a huge influence on even today's modern situation, but 70-some years of rapid economic development has shuffled the players, and the World Bank probably could do a much better job at reflecting that. It's also true that even the sort of agreement between the U.S. and the IMF, where the IMF leadership is selected by Europe and the World Bank leadership selected by the U.S., two things are true. That doesn't need to be the case anymore. It's pretty narrow. And by the way, just because the Americans pick the World Bank president actually doesn't mean it has to be an American. That being said, I don't know that our president right now would be the first to want to break that tradition. But I do know something very interesting, which is the first full year of whomsoever is the new World Bank leader will be the first year since the World Bank came into existence in which the United States is not the largest economy in the world. And that probably should be a bit more reflective in the organization, so it's the poetically correct timing to broaden the view. And I do think that, look, the last year has showed, at least those of us who see a convincing argument for climate change, a lot of adverse climate issues rising all over the world. And I would add to the climate change the inequality issue, which has been really front and center for most people and really does require a global institution like migration, like international free trade. So we find ourselves with intrinsically international issues defining the obstacles to progress.
If we talk about the structure of the World Bank, of course, one of the most important things is how it's being governed and how decisions are being made. At this point, the United States has the veto power of all the decisions made by the World Bank, by the board. And it has 16% of the voting right, while Japan has 6.9%, and some of the other countries have a much smaller share. So, Mr. Tangen, will that be challenged at a critical time when some of the biggest economies in the world are saying, well, we are not necessarily interested anymore in the global institution, while other players are coming up and playing bigger role in the global economy and certainly contribution to both the World Bank and the international system?
Actually, that ship has sailed. I mean, the creation of the AIIB, the BRICS Bank, a number of institutions, the whole Belt and Road Initiative was, in essence, a reaction to the kind of moribund nature of these two institutions and their unwillingness to share power. So this is a continuation, but this could lead to a new page, depending on what Donald Trump does. It's possible that things could change dramatically. Remember, the president of the World Bank is chosen by the executive board, 25 members who are there. They are not required to vote for the American. It has been an understanding, but somebody who doesn't respect understandings is Donald Trump, so quite possible it could go the other way this time around.
We do not want to do a tack on the American president, but the things are very interesting right now because last time, even during the nominee of the Obama administration, which is Mr. Yong Kim himself, he was actually challenged during the process when he was on his way to become the president of the World Bank by two other nominees coming from Colombia and also Nigeria. So there were precedents. Of course, according to tradition, it is usually an American citizen that eventually becomes the president of the World Bank. But Professor Wolf, so this process this time for competition to who will be the next president seems to be even more exciting, one would assume.
Yeah, and given the divided nature of American politics, whatever side you come down on any issue, it's also quite possible for the first time that American opinion, including even American government opinion, won't be united behind the official American candidate. That is something that we have not seen before, which could alter the dynamic. But the truth is, it's a global economy, and it's a world that's continuing to sort of globalize, if in fits and starts with steps backward as well as forward. And it's a world that's less American than it was 70 years ago, even though obviously still a very prominent, important place for the U.S. And it's quite possible, too, that by the time the next World Bank president, after this one is picked, the United States is not the first or the second largest economy in the world, and the World Bank, to stay relevant, needs to reflect those realities.
But on the other hand, Mr. Tangen, as skeptical as we could, the balance of power within the World Bank and the continuation of stability of the World Bank institution in order to be able to still fulfill the role that the board as a whole is assigning to the World Bank is also important. So how should we make sure, many is wondering right now, the balance? On the one hand, there has to be new ideas and also new momentum, as well as new challenges being brought out in this process of selection, just to be fair, to fit into the current situation of the world economy. But on the other hand, it has to be a smooth and stable transition so the World Bank as an institution could still function well. That is quite a delicate balance.
Well, you've laid out the rational case. The question is, will the current leadership follow it? Remember, this is playing out against the backdrop where the State Department has downgraded the EU down to basically an organization instead of the same level as a diplomatic as an ambassador. So it's a very, very strained time. We also have trade disagreements and things like this. So it's quite possible that this could be the break point at which things happen. Now, I mean, obviously we have to speculate a little bit of why Yong Kim has resigned. I mean, you did that marvelous interview, and he said, when there's no hope, you know, they should fire me. That suggests to me that he has lost hope for this institution.
We do not want to put words into Dr. Kim's mouth either, but what's going to happen, I'm sure there will be future stories coming out talking about that, particularly 1 year from now. On the other hand, the World Bank is an important global institution. After all, Professor Wolf, it is responsible for many of the goals set in the Global Development Goals, and that is extremely important. So SDGs, as they say, the World Bank is shouldering bigger responsibilities.
Look, the Sustainable Development Goals are one of many things, and we shouldn't throw the baby with the bathwater here. The World Bank has done many life-transformative and important projects all over the world across its history since the Second World War, and it also meaningfully reinvented itself already once, turning from a more Keynesian development institution to more of a sort of market deregulatory organ, ideological organ, and that was a major shift almost to the DNA level, if not in the makeup of the membership. So it has proven its ability to change. And I would caution one other thing as an economist. We tend to think these institutions are all kind of useless at the end of a long expansion, only to discover we're much better off having them than not when those expansions inevitably give way to economic downturns, and those loans and those facilities become very important to hundreds of millions of people around the world.
There might be problems and challenges facing these international institutions such as the World Bank, but if you look at that, it is a process that they have been going through in order to reinvent themselves. If you think about it, Mr. Tangen, at the end of the Second World War, the poverty population in the world, extreme poverty, extremely high as a result of chaos. And now, when economies, particularly developing and emerging economies, are getting much better, the role of the World Bank has also been evolving. It is trying to address much more with the development issues with more least developed countries. So it seems that an organization is gradually trying to reinvent itself. But how are we going to see it as a continuation process rather than abruptly interrupted by some of the political choices taken by certain countries?
Well, quite frankly, there has to be inclusion, and that's the problem. This is a political institution that was set up, as you pointed out, post-World War II, to try to bring order to the world, and it has undergone change. But now it's in need of a radical change again, and it's not just on the ideological basis, it's based on where the growth is. If you start looking at the World Bank's projected growth, you'll see that the developing and emerging world is 2.2 percentage points higher in terms of growth extended out over the next 10 years above the developed countries. So you're going to continue to have this kind of widening gap between the perception and the reality, where money is being made versus where the money is.
Professor Wolf?
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that the basic understanding of what accountability and transparency is required for leadership among international institutions has also changed enormously in the last 70 years, maybe even in the last 15 years. I think part of the World Bank's historical issue is that transparency and inclusion is a major challenge, and it's become much more of a challenge in an age, as you said, of a connected world where information travels much further, much faster, and much more widely, and so issues and shortfalls become major pain points fast. I do think there's a modernization required, but I wouldn't give up hope that could be achieved.
One of the things that the international institutions, the World Bank included, is not only to look at just the skin deep, but rather with a much longer vision. Of course, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations does help with that, but still institutions themselves, such as the World Bank, also have to make sure that it's being ingrained, the longer vision in all the projects they are doing right now. So Professor Wolf, I think from that perspective, it is also demanding a stability and a continuation of operation with, of course, more energy and more momentum coming into the institution and make it reinvent itself.
Absolutely, and I think that instead of figuring out how to get countries into the global financial architecture, which largely is run still by a small handful of developed countries, might be interesting to look at what happens if we make more of an effort to deepen and develop the national economic and financial structures of developing countries so that they don't necessarily take on all the risks and fragilities associated with economic development, which can sometimes be an unintended consequence of developing nations by helping them tap into international financial markets, which can in some moments be difficult or even predatory.
Mr. Tangen, final words from you as well.
It's a bit of an anachronism, but we need it. I would agree with my colleague on that, but it was created when the world was unipolar, and today it is multipolar.
Well, of course, we want to wish Dr. Kim, the president of the World Bank, all the best when he's taking on his new positions, and certainly whoever is coming into that role is going to shoulder a lot of responsibilities together with his team or her team at the World Bank. Thank you so much for now, the two of you, for being with us and sharing your insights. Max Wolf, Einar Tangen. Really appreciate it, gentlemen. And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program.